In this video, I'm going to cover how to create named functions in Excel and Google Sheets. So you're going to be able to use these in both. And the idea of a named function, it's basically a way for us to create a new function in our spreadsheet without using any programming like VBA or JavaScript. So it's just going to be our spreadsheet functions and that's it. So creating the function is going to be exactly the same in Excel and Google Sheets. The way you add the actual function in the end is a little bit different, and I'll show you the differences. It's really tiny. So let me just show you what we're going to accomplish by the end of the video. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a function called lookup. And the idea here is that this is a lookup that allows you to get multiple matches. So in this case, I would, for example, click on this ID as a lookup value, comma, then as a lookup array, I'm going to go to this people and select this range of IDs as a lookup array, comma, and as a return array, I'm going to select really any one of these columns. I'm going to go with their names right here. So I'll select this column. So that's going to be our first three arguments, similar to how something like XLOOKUP works. And then we're going to have this last separator argument, and you'll see what that is in just a second. For now, it's just going to be a comma in quotes, so it's really just text. And if I'd enter, what's going to happen, it's going to go find all the matches for this ID. So for example, if I go here and search for that ID, see, we have one here, and then if I do find next, there is two. There is another one here. So we find both of these matches, and we'll return them comma separated here. And the reason it's comma separated is because for the separator here, we use the comma. Now, I could have done like a space, colon, space, or something. Any separator should be fine here, and then I can drag this formula down, and I'm going to get my matches. So if there's only one match, then it's just going to return a match. If there's more than one, we're going to just separate those with our separators, and then if there's no match, we're just going to return a blank. So this is the function we're going to create in our spreadsheet. Now, by default, there is no lookup function, but we're going to make that function ourselves. So let's see how we're going to do this. So to be able to create a named function, first you need to understand a function called Lambda. So let me just add a new tab here. So Lambda is a function that returns a function. So this is really very new and groundbreaking in spreadsheets because up until now, our functions would just return a value or maybe an array, but we never had a function before that returns another function. So I had a training a couple of weeks ago and somebody asked me, what are your most favorite functions in Excel? So I never really thought about my favorite functions in spreadsheets because I just use them as needed pretty much. But when I thought about it, Lambda is probably in top 5 for me. But at the same time, I know this is not going to be a function that a lot of people are going to use because it's probably too complicated for most people to wrap their head around this. That being said, this is the function we're going to use to build a function. Now, if you want more detailed Lambda video, I actually have one on the channel. You can watch that video. Here, I'm going to keep it short and simple. So Lambda basically allows you to have parameters. So for example, I'm going to have a parameter. I'm going to call it X. You can really call it anything you like. And then after comma, you have either more parameters or a calculation you do with that parameter. Let's say we just have one parameter. So what I could do here, I could take that X and multiply it by 2 and close parentheses. So this function, see, it gives me this error like calc error, because to be able to use this function, we have to run the function because this function returns a whole new function. So to run that new function, we're going to open parentheses. And for that function, it's going to accept this parameter right here, this X. So if I just give it like 4, close parentheses, and hit enter, I get an answer 8. If I go back to this, basically we give this parameter 4, and this x becomes that 4. And then here we do the calculation. We take the 4 multiplied by 2, and this is basically our return value. Now, this is an example of a function with a single parameter right here. Now, you could also have a function with no parameters at all. So I could, for example, get rid of this and just say return 6. And then since this function now doesn't accept parameters, then here you would not pass any parameters. You still have to run the function. So if I enter, see, we get that 6. So we just get the return value. So you could have 0 parameters, you can have 1, 2, 3, however many you want. Let me also give you an example with 2 parameters. Let's say we have x, we have y, those are 2 parameters. And then after comma, we can say what we want to do with these 2 parameters in our actual calculation. And this calculation can be really anything. So any formula you could have placed here in this part of calculation. So I could simply just do something like x plus y. And then here in parentheses, I have to pass these parameters. So since I did 2 this time, then here I do those 2 parameters, 4 and 5. And if I enter, I get a 9 because now we take x as a 4, y as a 5. Then this last one is always going to be the calculation. So the last part in this lambda is your calculation, which is going to be 4 plus 5, and we get a 9. Now, you could also, for example, do like average function or really any other function here, and then just pass that x and y inside of this average function, which is a basic function from our spreadsheet. And then if I enter, I'm going to get the average of 4 and 5. Now, again, all these examples I'm giving you right now, they're just to understand how this function works, but they're useless, right? You wouldn't do any of this because if you have to do average, you already have average function. So the reason you would use something like this is when you have a complicated function and you want to simplify that and make it easy to consume. And that's what we're going to do next. So I'm just going to delete this and also delete this tab. So now let's see how we can create a function to actually return multiple matches. Because by default, something like XLOOKUP, VLOOKUP, whatever, they can only return one match. What I can do, I can go here. So for example, for this ID, I'd like to get whatever matches I want to get. So what I could do here, I could use filter function, and filter function is going to accept an array. And for that, I can go to this people, and then this is going to be the array that we need filtered. So in this case, I could, for example, select these names right there. And then I'm going to do a comma, and then we have include. So this include is basically a logical array of trues and falses. The way we can make that, we could, for example, select this list of column IDs like this, and then say it should be equal and give it some value, right? Now I could type that value here in codes like 6, 5, whatever, 3, 7, and basically just do that like this. But instead, I'm just gonna link to one of the cells. So after this equal sign, I'm gonna go back to this companies and click in this first ID I got here. So right now, if I close parentheses, before I hit enter, I want to remove this reference to the current sheet that it does for companies. So just A2 because it's my current tab for the last argument. So if I hit enter, what it does, it outputs this list of filtered values. And what it did, it basically just went to our list here and it found all those matches, like this one is one of those matches, and then we got another one here. So we have 2 of these. So it basically filtered to this one and this one. So we return that list. So that's our filter function. Again, if you want to learn more about any one of these functions, I have separate videos covering all of these. So all of that is on the channel. So at this point, what I can do, I don't want them to be outputted below each other like this. I just want to basically combine both of these in a single cell and put some separator in the middle. What I can do, I can use text join function, and this is going to accept a delimiter. So we could say like a comma as a delimiter. So that's a text, comma. And then whether we want to ignore empty cells or not, I'm going to say true, comma. And then we're going to give it the range. So something like this. So if I select that, hit enter, see, it will just combine those two things together with a comma in the middle. Now, instead of putting this separate from this, we could just take this filter function, copy that without equal sign, go back here and replace this inner value with that filter function, which returns the array. So now this way I can get rid of this, and I'm going to take this and put it in here. So you can see here, this comma is the separator. So if I wanted this to be a comma and a space, I would just type comma space, and then it's going to do comma space in the middle of this too. Now I'm just going to do a comma. That's good enough for me. So now let's try to drag this down. Now to drag this down, we need to make sure that this and this range is absolute. So I'm going to press F4, and then I'm going to drag it down so we can see what happens. And you can see for the most part, this is good enough, except that when there is no match, like for this particular ID, there's really no match in this list. So for that reason, our filter function basically returns this error. So I want to replace this with basically just a blank instead of doing this. So I'm going to go back to this. Let me just zoom out just a tiny bit here. So I'm going to go back to this and put this whole thing inside of if error function. You can handle this in other ways. So the point here is that this is how you're going to build your formula. And usually it will be some complicated formula. It's not going to be this particular formula probably for you, but it's going to be any other formula you build. So here I'm just going to do if error and go after this whole thing, do a comma, and say if it's an error, just return double quotes, meaning blank. And then if I take this and drag it down, you'll see that returns our matches. So now we got our formula, and if it's an error, it returns a blank. Now, this same formula, if I just copy this, should work in Google Sheets just fine too. So if I just go back and open Google Sheets and paste the same exact formula, we will get the same exact results. As you can see, no problem whatsoever. However, the way it is, it's very complicated for most people to use and understand. So this is where we can take this and convert it to something that's easier to use, create some sort of named function so it has parameters that are logically easy to understand. And that's what I'm going to do next. So what I'll do, I'll just grab this first formula without equal sign, because our first equal sign just starts the formula. And what I'll do, let me just hide this for now. And what I'll do here, I'm going to use a Lambda function. So now I'm going to think what parameters I'm going to need for this function. To do that, you usually just look at your function and understand what you're going to replace in it. So if I, for a second, just paste what I had, I'm going to remove this in just a second. So I want to look inside of this and see what ranges I have referenced here. So I referenced this column of values where we get the results. I referenced this column of values where I basically do the lookup. And then this is the actual value that I'm looking up, this A2. And finally, I also want to be able to customize this comma. Now, if you didn't want to do customization for that comma, you could just keep it hard-coded. And anything here can be kept hard-coded if you don't care about being able to customize it. But I want to be able to pass my own lookup value, pass my own lookup range and return array, and then finally pass my own separator. So those are the arguments I'm going to need. So again, I'm just going to cut this out of here for the time being. I'll paste it later. So right now, I want to list those functions in the same order I want them to be entered when I use this function. So the first one is going to be lookup value, comma. The second one is going to be lookup array. And we cannot have spaces in this name, so I'm using underscores. And then I'm going to do return array. And then finally, the last one here is going to be that comma separator. So I'm just going to call it separator. Those are the arguments. So I'm going to need 4 of these, comma. And then finally, we don't need more arguments. So as the last one in Lambda, we're going to paste the calculation. So I'm going to paste that formula I already had. And it just goes to the next line because we have a lot going on. But I do need a closing parentheses after this whole thing to close my Lambda function now. So this parentheses is now closing this. And then we're going to basically call that function using those parameters: lookup value, array, return, and separator. So for now, I'm not going to do any of those. Let's just deal with things we actually have to deal with before we get to running the function. So here what I'm going to do, instead of having this A2 hard-coded, which is pointing to the cell, I'm just going to replace it with this lookup value right here. So I'm going to go here and replace it with this lookup value. And that's a parameter we're going to be able to pass later when we run this function. Then the same way, I'm going to take this lookup array, copy that. And for me, lookup array is going to be the range in which I'm going to match the value, which was this in our filter function. And then finally, return array is basically the range from which we're going to return the results. So it's going to be this range, paste. And finally, I want to use the separator. So I'm going to copy that. And that's going to be this comma in quotes. So I'm going to paste it here as well. So basically, I took all the hard-coded values that I don't want to have, and I replace it with all of these parameters in this Lambda function that I'm creating. So now to run this Lambda function, we're going to go after this function and open and close parentheses, if you remember. And in this parentheses is where we're going to basically pass those arguments in the same order. So lookup value, now it's going to be this, comma. Then the next part here is what's called lookup array, right? After the comma, I'm going to go here under people, and I'm going to select this IDs, comma. Then the next one, if you remember, was return array. So it's going to be really any column here. So for example, this department, or maybe we should use the same column so it's not confusing. Let's do name so we can see that it returns the same thing. So I'm going to do that, comma. And the final argument here was the separator, which is going to be that comma in quotes. So I'm going to do this and hit enter. And as you can see, this works fine. So I was able to do this and still get my return. So at this point, if I want to be able to drag this, I'm going to do F4 on these two ranges because I don't want those ranges to move. And then I'm going to drag this down to get my returns. So as you can see, this works. Now, at this point, we want to replace this whole thing with a name that we can easily reference. Instead of writing all of this function, we want to kind of save it in a background and give it a name, and then just run that function with those values. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy all of this up until this running parentheses. And here's the part that's going to be a little different in Excel and Google Sheets. So in Excel, I'm going to go to formulas on top here and go to this name manager, and I'm going to add a new name. And right here, I'm just going to type the name I'd like to use for this function. So I want to call this mlookup. You can call it anything you want. And right here, as it refers to, I'm just going to paste that Lambda function, which returns, if you remember, a function. So I'm going to hit OK. So now we have a function called mlookup, which means I should be able to go back here. And if I just replace this entire thing right here with that name mlookup, that should work the same way. So now we just made a whole new function called mlookup. And notice that it gives us a nice autocomplete when I type like mlookup. If I just start over from scratch, we have lookup value, lookup array, return array, separator in that same order as we had our arguments. So now if I'm using this, I can just easily say, okay, so lookup value is this, comma, then my lookup array is going to be this first column, comma, and then my return array is going to be this, and then comma, and my separator is going to be, well, whatever you decide your separator is. In my case, I'm just doing a comma, and I can just drag it down. Well, actually, before dragging it down, we want to make sure this is absolute. So F4, and then I drag this down, and we got this done. So this is how we create a named function in Excel. Now, let's try to add this named function in Google Sheets. So I'm going to undo a couple of steps to get back to that Lambda. This one. So let's just grab the same Lambda function and make sure this still works in Google Sheets. So I'm going to copy this, go back to our Google Sheets spreadsheet. And if I just open this and paste this here, as you can see, that works just fine in Google Sheets as well. So that's the same Lambda function. We have the same parameters here, and we run the function. So that's pretty much where we are. And as you can see, we have this add new function here as a shortcut, but I'm not going to use that. So what I'll do, I'll just copy this, and I'm going to go under data, and I'm going to go to this named functions section to be able to add this new function. So here, we're going to click Add New Function. And it's going to ask us, what's the name for this new function? So I'm going to call it mlookup, just like I did in Excel. Here, you can do some description, what this function does. And then I'm going to scroll down, and as a formula definition here, I'm going to paste that Lambda function. Now here, as you can see, it does this arguments suggestions. So it's saying replace this A2, this, and this with arguments. That's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to click on this A2, and I want to type a name for this argument. So this is going to be my lookup value. And as you can see, what it did, it just puts the lookup value here instead of that A2 or whatever it was. And then I'm going to click on this second one, this part. So if you remember, this is our lookup array. So I'm going to click here. You could do this. You could also, instead of doing this, you could just copy this parameter from here and paste it instead of this. But in Google Sheets, you also have to add that here in this inputs list. So I'm going to go on top here and type that and hit enter. So now we got that return array as another argument here, and we're using it here and when we run the function here. And then finally, it doesn't really suggest to do a parameter for this last one, but we want to create it. So I'm going to go ahead and create another one, separator. And for that, we basically just put that as this last part, separator. So as you can see in Google Sheets, we don't just paste the function and we're done. We actually have to provide what are the parameters here. And then we have to also have them in this part as the running arguments of the function. So with this, I did all the separators and everything I had. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you can see hopefully this entire thing. Well, I guess it's not that much better, but hopefully a little better. So at this point, I'm going to hit next. So you can see here we have this descriptions. Now, if you wanted to describe what this lookup value is about, You could do that. I'm just going to skip all of this. It's all optional. So I'm going to hit create. So now we have a new function called mlookup in our spreadsheet, which means we should be able to, instead of doing all of this, again, do our mlookup. See, we have our lookup value. That's going to be this, comma. We have our lookup array, which is going to be this. So in Google Sheets, we can do open references like this. That should be fine, comma. And we have return array, which would be this. And then comma. And finally, the separator would be the comma I was looking for. So I'm going to do this, hit enter. And you can see we get the return. I'm going to erase all of this. And then finally, now to drag this down, I'm going to hit F4 and drag it down. And we got our results. And now we have a new function called mlookup in our spreadsheet we could use across this file. And then later, if you want to find this, you can go under data and go to named functions again. This panel will show up and you will see what functions you already have. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to mention, if you decide you want to change something about these functions or you want to get rid of them, the way you do that, once you get to this panel, you just roll over here on the right side. See, there is a little something here. It doesn't even show for me right now. So if I click on that, it gives me edit and remove. So I can go back and modify this, or I can delete the function from here. And the same way in Excel. So if I go back to my Excel spreadsheet here, just go under formulas and under name manager, you will find the function. You can delete, modify, whatever. It's going to be there. And there you go. That's how we can create a named function in our spreadsheets in both now Excel and Google Sheets. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.